All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone today. We are very pleased to have everyone in attendance. It's very important information we're going to be bringing today. We are very pleased to welcome on attorney Ted Sutton of Corporate Direct to help us understand and navigate the Corporate Transparency Act, which was a block of legislation that came into effect as of January 1 of this year. Has a lot of far-reaching implications for people that have things like LLCs and corporations, and who does need to do it, who doesn't, what that all kind of means. And we're very excited to dig into that today. A few intro piece of information. I'm your host today. My name is Alex Perny. I've been with Advanta doing self-directed and alternative asset investing for clients since 2012. And I've seen a lot of different pieces of tax legislation and corporate regulatory legislation come and go in my past 12 and a half years. And this is certainly one of the most direct, actionable pieces of legislation that will affect a lot of people in their structuring of investments. While it may not necessarily be complicated to actually do, it's important to know what needs to be done to keep yourself in compliance, because as Ted will get into, this is some stuff you definitely don't want to run afoul of. If you have any questions on how this might pertain to your account, if you are an account holder here at Advanta, please don't hesitate to give me a call afterwards, or I do encourage you, Corporate Direct and Ted Sutton do this as a service as well. Feel free to reach out to them and they can help you navigate some more specific point and legal questions as well. A quick disclaimer, since we are certainly covering some stuff that is very close to things that would be maybe considered advice, understand that Advanta IRA and our employees do not provide investment, tax, or legal advice, nor do we endorse or promote any investment products. All information and materials are for educational purposes only, and all parties are encouraged to consult with their attorneys, accountants, and financial advisors before entering into any type of investment or making any type of actionable decision on their corporate structures or any type of filing requirements that may or may not need to be done. Okay, a little bit about Advanta IRA. We've been in business for over 20 years, strictly just doing self-directed and alternative asset investing for clients. We're very proud of that number. We have a lot of really great employees and certified IRA services professionals that are here to assist and help you with anything that you need. We serve clients across the nation and internationally as well, with currently over $3.1 billion worth of assets under administration. So again, another thing that we are very proud of, and it kind of goes to the validity of kind of what our clients are doing and just how successful they have been in adoption of this type of investments. So again, please do reach out to us with any questions. With that said, I would like to turn it over to Ted here. We are going to be again going through the Corporate Transparency Act. Ted, thank you very much for taking some time out of your day to bring this very valuable information to our clients and our listening base as a whole. And again, please do remember, people, if you have questions, type them into the chat box. We will be monitoring those throughout. So Ted, if you wouldn't mind, give us a little bit of brief background about yourself and then jump into the topic at hand.
Of course. Yeah, well, thanks, Alex, for having me on. And, as a lawyer, it's good that you have the disclaimer up front. So, thank you again for that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So for those who don't know me, my name is Ted Sutton. I'm an attorney who's licensed to practice in Wyoming, Nevada, and Texas. I work with Corporate Direct and Sutton Law Center alongside my father, Garrett Sutton. He is a rich dad advisor. He's written a bunch of books in Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad series, and I got one of them right here on hand. This is Loopholes of Real Estate. He's also written other ones such as Start Your Own Corporation, Fail Not Fail, and about a dozen others. I've kind of lost track of how many books he's written. But so, it's been really helpful that he's associated with the Rich Dad Company, and then I went to law school, followed his footsteps, and now I've been working with him for 2 years. And in these first 2 years, it's been pretty interesting just because the Corporate Transparency Act was passed in 2021. I graduated law school 2022, and I've just hit the ground running, focusing on this new law. Ever since I become licensed as an attorney. So without further ado, let's dive into the Corporate Transparency Act. It's a really wide sweeping law that very few people are talking about. So, I'm happy to come on and educate as many people as possible, because at the end of the day, if you have an LLC, most likely you're going to need to report your information, and you're definitely going to need to know about this new law. So let's dig in. So what is the Corporate Transparency Act, or the CTA for short? Well, it's a new federal disclosure law that affects more than 30 million small businesses in the US. So, LLCs, corporations, limited partnerships, and the like. It was passed on January 1st, 2021 as part of the National Defense Authorization Act. So it was right as Trump left office and Biden entered. But it didn't take effect until January 1st of this year. And the CTA requires most of these small businesses to report information to FinCEN, which stands for Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, and it's a branch of the US Department of the Treasury. So what were the reasons why Congress passed the CTA? Well, they did so because they wanted to go after illegal activities. In the bill, they cited evidence of foreign nationals setting up shell companies in the US, to conduct money laundering, terrorist financing, all the like. But the thing is, there are some states like Wyoming where you can go in, set up an LLC, and you don't have to report any information to the Secretary of State. And so the federal government was concerned that they don't have this information about who owns the entity, especially for the handful of people who conduct illegal activities. Another reason was national security, just because there are foreign nationals who come in and set up companies here, and that could threaten our national security, whether, they're doing all these illegal activities, stealing intellectual property, things of that nature. Another thing is that they passed it to match other countries' compliance standards. So, when you set up a business in Europe, a place like the UK or Ireland or something like that, you need to report all this information to their federal government before you can set up a business. And so, the US was lacking that. There wasn't a database that had all that information. And then, on top of that, it was easier for law enforcement to go after bad actors, just because, sometimes entity structures are very complex, and it's, if anything bad happens, it's hard for law enforcement to find the owner at the very top. And so, having the CTA, hypothetically would make it easier for them. The question I have is, do the criminals self-report? I'm not so sure. So, those are some of the reasons why the CTA is here right now. So, FinCEN, I briefly mentioned this before. FinCEN stands for Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, and it's a branch of the US Department of the Treasury. And FinCEN is the agency that's tasked with storing all of this CTA information. And they're going to store it in this database that's called the Beneficial Ownership Secured System, or BOSS for short. And, this will handle all the CTA data. So if you have an LLC, you'll report that information, and then it'll just be in the BOSS server. One thing I should mention, because I do get a lot of questions about this, is that this database is not going to be accessible to the public. It's only going to be accessible to a handful of federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies, as well as some financial institutions in limited circumstances. So, a lot of people were hesitant to report this just because they think that this database is going to be available to the public. It's not. It's going to be confidential. But however, it is going to be a very target-rich database because it's going to store information about 30 million small businesses in this country. So, the hackers may or may not go after that. We'll see. So, when you submit this information to FinCEN, you're submitting these reports called BOI reports, and it stands for Beneficial Ownership Information Reports. And with these reports, you're required to report 3 pieces of information to FinCEN. The first is the reporting company information. So, information about the LLC, corporation, partnership. The second is the beneficial ownership information. This is anyone who owns the company or has any sort of authority over it. And the third piece is the company applicant information, which I'll touch on a little bit later. So the first piece is the reporting company information. And the definition of a reporting company is any company, whether it's domestic, created here, or foreign, created abroad, that's created by filing a document with the Secretary of State or a similar office. So, if you have an LLC in Florida, you set it up in Florida, that would count as a reporting company. So here's some examples of reporting companies. I think it's important to just distinguish what counts as a reporting company and what does not. So LLCs count as reporting companies, and if you have it through a self-directed IRA or a checkbook IRA or anything like that, they will count as reporting companies. They also apply to C Corps, S Corps, limited partnerships, as well as two types of trusts. There's statutory trusts and business trusts. And effectively any other entity that's created by filing a document with the Secretary of State. And then there are examples of companies that aren't reporting companies. These include general partnerships, sole proprietorships, revocable living trust, and irrevocable trust. And the reason being is that they're not created by filing a document with the Secretary of State. And because of that, they don't count as reporting companies. So, you don't need to report any information there. There are also there are 23 exemptions to the reporting company requirement. But the two main ones, which I'll talk about next, are the large operating companies and the inactive entities. So if you meet all of those requirements, you're not going to need to report any information. So for the reporting company exemptions, there are 23 of them, but there's 2 of them that I think everyone needs to know. The first is the large operating company exemption. So, these are companies that employ a lot of people. They have a lot of revenue, like the Googles, Apples, Teslas, things like that. And so if you meet all 3 of those requirements, then you'd be exempt from reporting any information. So the first requirement is that you employ 21 or more full-time employees in the US. The second is that you have more than $5 million in gross receipts filed on a federal tax return, and that's income derived from the US. And then the third is that you have a physical office located somewhere within the country. So this is where you either own a building or you rent space there. And this does not apply to remote or shared spaces. So if you meet all 3, if you have a company that meets all 3 requirements, then you don't need to report anything. But if you fall below, or if you meet 2 of them, then you would have to report. And then the second exemption is the inactive entity exemption. And this is effectively where you set up a company 5 years ago, you wanted to do something with it, but it ended up sitting on the shelf. You didn't do anything, you didn't touch it, put money into it. And if it meets all these 6 requirements, then you wouldn't need to report any information to FinCEN. So in existence before January 1st, 2020, no active business, no ownership by a foreign person. Ownership hasn't changed in a year. You haven't sent or received funds over $1,000, and you don't hold any other type of assets. So if you meet all 6 of them, if you have a company that's just sitting on the shelf and you meet all 6 requirements, you don't need to report. There are some other exemptions. I'm not going to go through them, but they relate to tax-exempt entities like nonprofits, banks, insurance companies, and entities that are registered with the SEC. So effectively, those types of companies are already regulated by the federal government, and so they don't need to do these filings.
Great. Just a kind of an interjection. I think it's a good time to interject a couple of questions that have been filing in, if you don't mind. Someone asked that there was a lawsuit in Alabama that ruled the CTA was unconstitutional. Are you aware of that, or if it has any broader implication to that specific question on the Alabama lawsuit?
Yep, so I have a slide on that at the end of this presentation. So I will
Okay.
hold that and answer it when I come to that, but that is a
All right.
good question.
Great. Then is there any other business entity or structure we don't need to register with the CTA? Pretty sure you covered that. Um, uh, the next question, if you have a land trust or other type, does it need to be registered with the CTA? And I believe if the ownership does have a corporate end on that, that would qualify it. But if you could elaborate a little bit more on that specifically, that'd be great.
Yeah, so we don't recommend using land trusts here. There's just a lot of inconsistencies with them. The land trust itself would not need to file, and the reason being is that it's a private document. You don't perform a filing with the Secretary of State to create a land trust. But if you set up an LLC to be the trustee or the beneficiary, then that LLC would count as a reporting company, and you need to report your information. So, but the land trust itself is not a reporting company, but the LLCs associated with it are.
Yep, great. Another question is, so if your LLC is registered in Wyoming, do you not need to register with the CTA because of their like informational requirements, or no?
So you would have to. So it's any entity that's set up in any of the 50 states. So, if you have a Wyoming LLC, you would need to do a CTA filing.
Great. And then just a couple more, and then we'll get back into it. Let's see. With the homeowner's nature, we need to file this form. This one. I'm one of 8 homeowners in an HOA. Why does our HOA need to file this form? There is no one person in an HOA that is a beneficial owners. All own an equal share.
Yep. So HOAs do because there's the tax exempt entity exemption, and that falls under, it's like if it's defined in section 501, it doesn't need to report, but homeowners are described in section 528 of the tax code. And so they don't meet the definition of that exemption. And so because of that, they would need to file a report. When it comes to beneficial owners, in that case, usually it would be anyone who's an officer, so the president, treasurer, secretary, VP, all that. So you'd report the HOA, and then all of those individuals who hold positions on the HOA would need to submit their beneficial ownership information.
Great, and then we'll just do one more question, and again, keep the questions coming in. I will get to them if I didn't get ones that are in there right now. The last one is, what about a corporate what about an LLC owned by a self-directed IRA?
Yeah, so the LLC would need to report in that scenario. And so, whoever has control over the IRA would technically be a beneficial owner. And so, you would need to do a filing there.
Great. All right. Well, I'll turn it back over to you. Just make sure you just touch the mouse a little bit to do that handshake. Again, everyone that's asking questions, we will get to those at another little breaking point, so keep them coming in.
Yep. And then we'll cover the Alabama case at the end of it. So.
Yeah, and lastly, one person did ask a question about going back a slide. You can grab a copy of the slides as the handout to this presentation. I just like to keep it moving forward, so feel free just to download it, and you can look through back in the slides for reference.
Yep. Okay. Oop, I think it skipped. Okay, so let's see. We got the exemptions. Okay. So if your company counts as a reporting company, there's 4 pieces of information that you need to report. The first is the company name, as well as any trade names or DBAs if you have them. The second is the business street address of the company. And this cannot be a PO box, a registered agent address, or a third-party address. So, Corporate Direct is a professional registered agent service. We've had clients ask if we could use our registered agent address on their behalf, and the answer is no. So in some cases, this may be your residential address or, wherever your office is located. The third is the formation jurisdiction, so whichever state you're set up in. And then the fourth is a unique business number, which will be an EIN number from the IRS. So if you have that EIN number, you'll report that and you'll be fine there. So the second piece of information is the beneficial ownership information. And under the definitions, a beneficial owner can be one of two things. The first definition relates to ownership, and this is somebody who owns 25% or more of the reporting company. And then secondly, this can be somebody who has a management role. And the definitions are here that this person exercises substantial control over the company. So effectively, if you have any management authority, like with an LLC, if you're a manager, corporation, board of directors, officers, all that, you would count as somebody with substantial control. That's just, this is meant to be read broadly. So, if you have any sort of management authority over a reporting company, regardless of your ownership, you would be a beneficial owner. So, the first is ownership, 25% or more. Second, management, if you have any management authority. So what is and what is not a beneficial owner? So, as I mentioned, it's somebody who owns 25% or more, or they exercise substantial control over the company. So, if you have somebody who owns 10% of an LLC, but they're listed as the manager, then they would be a beneficial owner. These can also be holding companies. If you have an LLC on top, like a Wyoming LLC that owns an interest in LLCs beneath it, that person would have to report. As well, this can also be trust too. So, kind of like the IRA arrangement where, we set up LLCs for people, and a lot of times people have their trust own their interest in the LLC. So in that case, at least the trustee would be the beneficial owner of that LLC. And then examples of people who are not beneficial owners are people who do not own 25% or more, and they don't exercise any substantial control over the company. So, if you're at 10%, but you have no management control, then you're not a beneficial owner. And there are some exceptions. These are for minors, agents, employees of a company, people with future inheritance rights, and then company creditors, who only have a debt interest that can't be converted into equity. So if you're a beneficial owner, then you need to report 4 pieces of information. The first is your name. The second is your birth date. The third is your residential street address. This can't be a business address. This has to be where you live. And then lastly, an unexpired driver's license or passport that has both a document number on it as well as an image of yourself. And the thing with the CTA is that there is an ongoing reporting requirement there. When your driver's license or passport expires, you only have 30 days to get that information to FinCEN. And we here at Corporate Direct, we have a tickler system where, when people's driver's license or passports expire, we notify them, we get their information, and then submit a FinCEN report, just to make sure that you're in compliance with this new law. So the third piece of information, we covered the reporting company, the beneficial owner. The third piece of information is the company applicant information. And, the company applicant can be a maximum of 2 people. The first is the person who directly files the document to create the reporting company. And the second is the person who's primarily responsible for directing the filing. So, at Corporate Direct, we have paralegals who do these filings all the time. So they're the ones who directly file the document. So they would be a company applicant. And then the second person is the person who's primarily responsible, which is the client. So, it'd be both the client and the paralegal would be the company applicant. However, this information only applies to entities formed after January 1st, 2024. So if you have an entity that was set up in 2023 and earlier, you don't need to worry about reporting this information. So if you are a company applicant, you're required to report 4 pieces of information. The first is your name, second is your birth date, third is either a business or a residential street address. So there's a little more flexibility there. And then the last is an unexpired driver's license or passport with a document number and an image. So, it's a lot like the beneficial ownership requirement there. So this is, I think, the most important slide. When it comes to knowing the timing to report this information, as well as what the penalties are if you don't report. So the timing to file these BOI reports depends upon when your entity was formed. So if you have an entity that was formed before January 1st of this year, then you have until the end of this year to get that information to FinCEN. So there's a lot more of a grace period for those who have an entity already set up. The second is for entities that are formed in 2024. So if you set up an entity this year, you only have 90 days to get these reports to FinCEN. So if you had a company that was set up in March, then those reports have already come due. And then if you set up an entity in 2025 and later, you only have 30 days to get this information to FinCEN. So, these will be done concurrently with filings in the future. The clock will really start to tick next year. So it's important to know these dates. And then another thing is that if you file an updated or a corrected report, so let's say that you change addresses, your driver's license expires, you change your business name, anything like that, then you only have 30 days to get this information to FinCEN. So, people have a lot going on. This is something that we here at Corporate Direct would be happy to help you with, and do these filings and make sure that you avoid the penalties, which I'm about to discuss. So if you do not report this information, the penalties for not filing are $10,000 in fines and or 2 years in jail. So this law definitely has some teeth to it. And the last thing I want for you guys to do is to not comply and then be slapped with a $10,000 fine. Like, I really just don't want that to happen to you. So, this is really important. It's important to know when to file and the penalties for not filing, because they are very steep. So this was the Alabama case that somebody had a question about. So somebody filed a lawsuit it was the Federal District Court of Alabama, and the case was called National Small Business United versus Yellen. What happened is National Small Business United is the National Small Business Association. They filed a lawsuit against the Department of the Treasury, and the judge there held that the Corporate Transparency Act was unconstitutional because it exceeds the Constitution's limit. So while that may be true, there are 3 things that you need to know about. The first is that this ruling only applies to the named plaintiffs in the case. So this was the National Small Business Association, which is only a group of 65,000 businesses. So it's only unconstitutional as to them. And what that means is for anyone who's not a part of that association still needs to do their CTA filings. So, there's been a lot of misinformation out there about the CTA being unconstitutional. It is only as to a certain number of people, but, to everyone else, it's still in effect. The second thing is that the CTA and this ruling could very easily be overturned on appeal. The judge, his name was Lyles Burke. He was a Trump appointee. And while he did rule it was unconstitutional, I don't know how the Supreme Court's going to rule. It is a conservative majority, but you you could have people like Roberts and Kavanaugh and Gorsuch say that they could hold that the CTA is in fact constitutional. And I think there's a good chance about that. So, I wouldn't hold my breath, and we here at Corporate Direct, we're just proceeding as planned. We're going to keep doing these filings. We're going to wait and see what the Supreme Court says, but I'm proceeding as if they will overturn this ruling. And then the third thing to know is that other states have passed transparency acts of their own. So New York was the first to follow suit. The federal government passed the CTA, but other states are starting to follow their lead and pass their own CTA laws. So New York passed the New York LLC Transparency Act. That takes effect in January 1st of 2026. So if you have a New York LLC, you're going to have to double report this information to the New York Department of State. So, you can kind of see why people are leaving there. And then another thing is that California is proposing, they have a Senate bill that's proposed that's going to have something similar to the CTA. But the database that they plan on storing that information will be available to the public. So, that's something to be on the lookout for. Newsom hasn't signed off on it yet, but, if he does, I think more people will leave the state, frankly. And then Maryland passed a similar law as well. So, that could be the tip of the iceberg. There could be many more states that follow suit. I think we'll just have to wait and see. So, keep these three things in mind, just because it could be, the Supreme Court could very easily overturn this ruling. And then on top of that, states have free reign to do whatever they want, just because corporate laws have always been creatures of state law. So, it's important to keep all these things in mind. And, right now, I think it's best practice to just proceed as planned and just do these filings. So, real quick before I get to questions, if you want to set up a free 15-minute consultation with one of our specialists, they're very well versed in the Corporate Transparency Act. They can help you through it. You can schedule a free 15-minute consult by using that link. And then also, as I mentioned, my dad has written a bunch of books. He's sold over 1 million copies. But I published an ebook last year, and it's titled The 5 Tricks to Teach Your Kids About Money. And it's designed to boost your kids' financial IQ. And you can go ahead and download that book for free by using that link right there. It doesn't cost you anything. I've sold about 200 copies. My dad's at 1 million. So, if you can close that gap for me, that'd be greatly appreciated.
Oh, I certainly do appreciate it. Thank you so much for all the great information. And I do apologize if anyone hears any loud cracking in the background on my end. I live in Florida, and one of the constants of where I live is massive thunderstorms on the daily in the summer. So we're getting one right now. So let me go back to where we kind of left off on the questions, and there are a lot of them. Okay, so one person asks, isn't beneficial ownership information already on a tax return? Why can't this information be obtained to satisfy those requirements? Again, not everyone has to file a tax return for a business entity, and I would assume that there will be some additional clarity that that Ted can offer to that question as well.
Yeah, that's actually a really good question, and now that you raise it, that could be that could have been something that Congress could have considered. But you still need to report this information. Certain entities are taxed as disregarded entities where, you just file your personal tax return. But, I think Congress just wanted more transparency. I mean, it is true you have to report that information to the IRS, but Congress wants to make it easier to find who the beneficial owners are. And so, unfortunately, the law is the law, and you're just going to have to report this information to the Department of the Treasury a second time.
Yeah, absolutely. Question, I think this was covered, but just to make sure it does get addressed, what about corporate structures such as S-Corps? Do they need to also be registered?
Yes, in most cases they will. You know, you can have some S corps that meet the large operating company exemption, where you employ, you know, 21 or more people, $5 million in gross receipts, and you have an office space somewhere. So that just depends if you meet that requirement. If you fall below it and you're an S corp, then you have to report. But you know, if you meet the threshold there, then you wouldn't.
Gotcha. And this was an interesting one that personally I would like as well. So someone asked, I saw that limited partnerships on the list. If my IRA is invested as a limited partner with a multifamily syndication or other type of, you know, limited partnership in investment, the IRA directly plugs in, it's not through an LLC, would there be a reporting requirement in that instance?
So do you have a limited partner? Do they have a limited partnership set up, or are they only investing into a limited partnership?
They've invested into the limited partnership from the context of the question.
So the IRA would not, but the limited partnership that you invest into would. So, you know, you just have to tell the GP, hey, you know, there's this reporting requirement, you know, hopefully you comply with it.
Yeah. And then this one as well. So in the context of an IRA that owns a checkbook LLC, who exactly does the report go through? And this is something that again we would like some clarity on as well. So would it be necessarily Advanta, since the IRA, you know, IRAs are most analogous to trust in a technical sense, would it be ultimately the IRA owner that would need to make that report with their personal information?
So the IRA, so just so I understand clearly, so you have an LLC below. Advanta is the owner of that LLC.
And yeah, as the custodian. So like, you know, the IRA owns the LLC, single member LLC, or there certainly are some multi-members as well, but the IRA is the member, and that's the custodial agreement, you know, it's Advanta IRA, LLC, FBO, client name, IRA 123. So in that case, who specifically and what information would need to go on that report?
So the trustee would need to report. So I believe that would be, you know, you or somebody else at Advanta IRA.
Okay.
You know, I think it wouldn't hurt to have the individual owner of the LLC report their information too, you know, because they could count as a beneficiary, you know, so they, you know, I would recommend just doing both.
Okay.
Because yeah,
Let's see. Let's see. When and how do we report this information? Okay, I think that was covered.
Yeah, so it goes, if you just type in FinCEN BOY report, it's like fincen.gov, and they have a web page where you can submit the BOI reports. You know, you can do it on your own if you want to. You know, we're doing it for our clients, but you know, you can do it there.
Yeah, this next one's a good question because it kind of gets into the DBA aspect. So the question is what if there's an LLC that is reported under another company's EIN? Would I report under the EIN given to the entity from the IRS or the EIN from the parent holding company that is being reported?
It would be from the entity itself. So it would be, you know, not from the parent. If you have a subsidiary in a parent company and the subsidiary has its own EIN number, then you would report that.
Oh, okay. Okay, that was answered. Okay, as a beneficial owner, what information about yourself is there? Okay, we covered that. Registered name, address, social, all that kind of stuff. Let's see, continuing from my previous question, I was also wondering if we report under the owner's social, if the company's taxes are reported under the owner's social on 1040.
Okay.
That was, yeah.
I think, you know, I think it would be best practice to just get an EIN and then just use that. So you mean for the reporting company?
Yeah, I mean, that's, again, I read it verbatim off of what was there.
Okay. So yeah, I would recommend getting an EIN number and then just using that. You know, the reason being is that I've had to deal with this in the past. I actually know some people who, you know, didn't have an EIN and then they had to get one to do a filing. So I would recommend doing that It could be, there could be another taxpayer identification number though. So, that could suffice as well, but in most cases, it'll just be the EIN number.
Gotcha. And then one person was asking, and with regard, entities formed before January 1 of this year need to report, but they just have a longer timeline as opposed to the 90-day window that corporations this year started, correct?
That's correct. Yeah. So for anything 2023 and earlier, you have until December 31st of this year to get it in. Our office is going to be slammed the last 2 months just because of all the people who are reporting. But yeah, this year, the reports have already come due for the beginning part of the year. And then in 2025 and later, it's 30 days.
Gotcha. If you file for a new trade name, does that require a filing an update?
I believe so. It wouldn't hurt to do that. You need to just list all that stuff. If it's applicable and you change your trade name, then yeah, I would recommend doing an updated report.
Gotcha. Okay, so I think that answers the next question. So the people asking for information on billing for services for corporate direct, I'd recommend you just reach out to them directly in case, these are put out there kind of in the ether forever. So I prefer to keep pricing off these webinars just because if something changes, I always like it to be accurate. So I just encourage you to reach out to Ted directly and they can certainly go through any costs that they have for their services.
Yep.
Another question, can you file for a company in any state?
You mean like set up an entity in any state?
No, can you do the CTA work and do that reporting for a client in any state?
Yeah, we help clients in all 50 states. So, we have 13,000 clients across the country. And so, yeah, we'd be happy to, regardless of where you live, we'd be happy to help you out.
Yeah, someone asked, and I would imagine the answer is yes. If you register and this law changes, does your information remain in the CTA? I'd imagine that the update to any law would have to address the information retention on that end.
Yeah. Yep.
Let's see. How do we get the form to actually file if we have to file this year on existing companies? I believe you addressed that with the FinCEN's website, correct?
Yep, either, you could do that, you could do the FinCEN website, or you could use us, and when you need any information updated, we'll reach out to you and then do the amended filing. So, there is an ongoing requirement there, and we'd be happy to make your life easier and make sure you're in compliance with this new law.
Gotcha. And this is a really good question. I didn't even think about that. What about Puerto Rico and USVI? Are they falling under the CTA requirements?
Yeah, so it would be the Secretary of State or any similar office. So, any sort of foreign territory. If it's a U.S. territory, it would apply. Because it applies to Indian tribes too. So.
Okay, gotcha. So your Guams, your Puerto Ricos, U.S. Virgin Islands, Marshall Islands, any of those, if it's protectorate or territory of the U.S. and you have a filing there, you need a file, correct?
Yep.
Okay. Let's see. I have a Florida LLC for about 8 years and it's been inactive last year and this year, no income. I still have the LLC, but not actively earning income. Would this be exempt from filing?
If it meets all the requirements, it would. So, no change in ownership. You haven't received $1,000 or anything like that. So if you meet all 6 requirements, you wouldn't need to report. But, I think you would need to just go through them and see, if you meet all 6.
Yeah, and this is another good one. So, and not just to an IRA specifically, but the question was posed to it specifically to an IRA. If you have an entity and you dissolve it this year, do you still need to report?
Yep. And I just wrote an article and did a video on that actually. So if you have an entity and you dissolved it, but it was not fully dissolved at any time after January 1st, 2024, then you still need to do a CTA report.
Yeah, and I believe you covered this as well, but is this a one and done information on the report, such as address changes? Would a new report be required if you used a passport as an ID and renewed the passport?
Yeah, so If no information changes, it's one and done. But if your passport or driver's license expires or you move, then you would need to submit an updated report within 30 days.
Gotcha. Let's see. Would a general partner need to report a limited partner info if they own less than 25% of the partnership shares?
Great question. I don't think so. The general partner would, because they would have the substantial control. But if a limited partner has less than 25%, then they wouldn't.
Gotcha. Let's see. And for the specifics of this, someone asked, for your IRAs, you're never supposed to provide your own personal social because everything's reported to the trust tax ID as far as what information comes in. But I would imagine this is not necessarily so much a taxable requirement in the context of what they're asking, to make sure that income's not reported to them, but more, again, it's just focused on ownership. So not necessarily kind of a taxable issue. They just want to collect the information for, good, bad, or indifferent. I think, leaving all of our personal opinions aside on it, it's basically just an information gathering bill for ownership. Nothing to really necessarily do with taxes, because this is the Department of Treasury and FinCEN, not necessarily a taxable agency like the IRS.
That's correct. Yeah, so they're two separate things.
Yeah. Let's see. Yeah. Oh, and so another good one, because it's not listed here, and we are kind of getting to the end of the questions. If people want to reach out or get information from Corporate Direct in your outfit, how can they reach out to you?
Yep, so you can click that link right there. You can go to corporatedirect.com/schedule, or you can just go to the regular website at corporatedirect.com. We have a lot of information on the Corporate Transparency Act. My dad and I have written a lot of articles, done a lot of YouTube videos. If you go to YouTube, type in Corporate Direct, you'll find the channel there. I do videos once a week. So, either or, if you just want to educate yourself, you can go to the Corporate Direct website or to YouTube. But if you want us to do your FinCEN filings or help you with corporate cleanup or anything like that, then you can go to corporatedirect.com/schedule and then schedule a free 15-minute consultation with one of our specialists.
Alrighty, sounds good. And again, to the very last one, and we'll end this up here because we are kind of getting to the top of the hour. This webinar will live in perpetuity on our YouTube channel. So at Advanta IRA, go to our YouTube channel. You can find it there if you'd like to go back as well. The slides are attached as a handout to this webinar. So if you wanted to have a reference, you can just grab them right off of there as well. So again, I really do appreciate, Ted, you being on with us today. The most valuable asset we all have is our time, and I really appreciate you carving some time out to educate us on this, seemingly innocuous but very far-reaching and very real bill that will affect a lot of people. The burden of actually doing it may not be that great, but the penalties for not doing it and maybe not being aware of it are substantial. So. Again, really do appreciate your time. Any last parting thoughts before we go ahead and end this up for everyone?
You covered it pretty well. I think the one thing is it's really unfortunate that nobody's talking about this. There hasn't really been a push by the federal government or the mainstream media. So it's really important that people know about it, that people spread the word. And, if you guys need help with any of this, I'd be happy to help you out.
Alrighty. Well, again, thank you so much for being with us today. Again, really appreciate your time, and as well as everyone that attended today. Thank you so much for joining in with us. Again, this will be on YouTube. We normally get these up towards the end of the business day. If not, it'll definitely be up there tomorrow, and the slides are attached as a handout. With that said, thank you so much, and everyone have a great rest of your day.